think those people pose some very good questions. How did a young South African girl end up in North America exploring the fracking industry there?
Yeah, I am in the film industry. I work in the media industry as a director and a cinematographer, as a journalist in terms of writing. And I stumbled across the fracking issue in 2011, back when it first started reaching some of the columns in newspapers and the debate had just started unfolding. I'm from the Karoo, and so I was kind of interested in what fracking was, what was this idea of something happening in the Karoo, because as far as I could tell, nothing ever happened in the Karoo.
Right.
And I was quite surprised that people were taking an interest in this sort of barren land in the middle of the country. And I was quite optimistic about fracking in the beginning, because I believe that it could be the solution to the poverty in the area.
I think a lot of people were quite optimistic about fracking in the beginning.
Yeah. And I think in South Africa you have real grounds to. I mean, we have, you can't be naive about the fact that there are people without food or electricity, or the fact that we have a national energy problem. And I was incredibly optimistic about it. Didn't think it was such a bad thing. I was quite controversial, I suppose. Being from the Karoo, everyone expects you to be anti-fracking, and dinner conversations were probably less comfortable than I could have helped. And early on into this investigation, which was at that stage just a personal one to understand whether or not I would support something like this, I think I got a petition about it online. A friend of mine sent it to me, assuming that I'd take up the cause.
She's from the Karoo. She would be against it.
Exactly, yeah. And so then I did some research about it and found that there is such a little information. I think that was the main problem that really that concerned me, because the people in the Karoo don't have access to the media that you and I necessarily do. And that scared me in the sense that there are people in a massive area where they're proposing to drill who've never heard about fracking and don't really have means to inform themselves.
Right.
And that's quite dangerous, because they're rural, marginalized communities, and you need to respect that those people need to be informed in a manner in which they can understand, as opposed to very complex.
Given the information and be like, figure it out.
Exactly, and a very complex sales pitch. I mean, fracking is really a complicated topic to understand and get to the bottom of. And so that was kind of the drive to keep on looking into it, trying to understand, give back to the Karoo when I could. If I went home, I'd go to community meetings and share what I found. And then I had the opportunity of going to the United States, where fracking was developed.
Right.
To cross-check, I think, what I'd found here, and to see, if everything was adding up, the pitch that was being made to South Africans, and realized just how wrong I had been in my assumption. And the first 2 weeks that I was in the States, just realizing and having to swallow that bitter reality of, I might have been too optimistic too soon.
So in the first 2 weeks, you already knew?
Yeah, and it was interesting, because the first week I still remember getting off the plane in the US and going, okay, cool, it's going to be a couple of 1 or 2 weeks in the States, and go home and this is done, because it wasn't really a film at that stage. I wasn't really sure. I'd been filming, but I thought it would just be a quick YouTube video that I'd put out there as someone from the Karoo, adding to the discussion. But when I was there and realizing, going to gas drilling communities where this was happening, and that there was so much that we haven't been told, so much that's been hidden from the public.
What are some of those things?
Well, I think one of the major stings, to go straight into what sets Unearth apart in the investigation or in terms of the extent of the investigation, is uncovering so many cases of water and air contamination that have been permanently hidden from the public and from governments across the world due to non-disclosure agreements. So what happens in gas drilling areas, if someone is impacted by gas drilling operations, be that fracking or not, usually the first people to arrive on the property or meet with the family is the nearby gas company.
Oh, really?
And they will provide clean water or offer to relocate the family to a safer place, or buy them a new house or something. But in exchange for that, they need to sign an agreement that prevents them from ever speaking about it. And so that statistic becomes hidden from you and I and from the public at large.
How did you speak to these people then?
Well, some of them, I met some families who were in different stages of litigation, and so some could share more than others. Right. And I think during my whole trip, I ended up spending 5 months in the US. There were a lot of people that couldn't speak to me. But slowly but surely, I could piece it together. They could share some records with me. I could kind of get some parts of the story. Many families I could speak to that it had just happened to. So they hadn't really entered litigation. Right. They were still trying to understand what was happening. And what's interesting now, I think those families that I interview and feature in the film, some of them are under gag order now and actually can't speak anymore. So it's an incredible, very exclusive glimpse into what's happening on the other side. And the industry is they've suffered pretty severe public PR crisis with the fracking debate. I mean, they haven't come off the darling in the public's eye, and so it's harder and harder to get in and to speak to communities or speak to people involved in the industry, speak to companies themselves. And I'm grateful that I feel like I got in just in time before the door was really closing, in terms of being able to speak to communities, but also speak to people who are working on the fracking side, speak to the companies who are involved, because that was the commitment all along, was really speaking to everyone involved and speaking to all sides of the debate to come out at the end with a conclusive, sort of broad summary of what's happening.